So this morning I have a few messages on just on deck that I've been wanting to just share and give to the congregation, and this is not one of those messages. When Dave asked me to speak, he asked me to speak specifically on gratitude, and I don't really have a lot to say about gratitude because I'm not a really grateful person. So at first I was just like, okay, I'll do it. I mean, I'm not going to say no, but then the 3 weeks since he's asked me have been a very difficult last 3 weeks. I've been struggling with some emotional stuff just going on in here. And the tougher things got to process emotionally, the less I wanted to write a message on gratitude. Because when we are talking about gratitude and we're experiencing pain, the two just seem so counterintuitive. But it's absolutely necessary. So I'm going to pray real quick, and we're going to talk about how to be grateful even when it hurts. That's the title of the message. So God, thank you so much that you are here. Thank you for that amazing worship. And for just letting us know, hey, I'm here hanging out with you guys. God, I just ask that we would continue to tap into your presence and into your spirit, that we would receive what you have for us this morning. And we love you in your name. Amen. Thanksgiving 2002. I woke up that morning to the smell of pumpkin pies in the oven, to the sound of my mom and grandma getting Thanksgiving ready in the kitchen, fresh baked rolls, turkey. You come out and you're in your pajamas and you see mom and grandma, and they've been in the kitchen cooking since 5:30 in the morning, and they're sweating and they look really gross. I wouldn't say that to them, but they did. And you just get there, and you know that we have the thing that makes our table longer. They call it a leaf, right? I don't know why they call it a leaf. It doesn't look like a leaf, but they call it a leaf. It's just this long thing that makes your table longer. And we have aunts and uncles and other grandparents and family friends, and they're all coming over to the house. And my mom had the house looking beautiful. It was ready for Thanksgiving. And that was so typical for my mom. She made every holiday and every birthday and every Christmas just something to be filled with gratitude for. And in one day, she could give you 1,000 reasons to be thankful. And so I remember growing up, holidays were just this thing of this is excitement, there's anticipation, there's that sense that you're on the top of a roller coaster and you're ready to go down. Holidays were so special when I was growing up. Fast forward 10 years, Thanksgiving of 2012, and it's the first Thanksgiving we're celebrating after my mom takes her life. And you wake up, and there's no smell of pumpkin pie in the oven. There's no fresh baked rolls. There's no sense of anticipation. There's no family members at the house getting everything ready. There's just this sinking, lingering feeling in the pit of your stomach that just asks the question, what now? What do I do now? How do I practice gratitude when I'm angry at God? How do I practice gratitude when it seems like the most basic common sense prayer that I would ask God to do, which is help heal my mom, didn't happen? How do you practice gratitude when you're mourning and you're frustrated and you're angry because it seems so counterintuitive to do? How do you engage in that? James chapter 1, verse 2, it says to consider it pure joy whenever you face trials and tribulations of many kinds. When I'm going through a hard time and I read that, I think, what a stupid thing to say. I mean, that's I love the Bible, and I hope I don't go to hell when I die, but I just don't think it's always realistic. I'm kidding. I love the Bible. When I read that, and I think it's like saying, okay, you're really sad, just be happy instead. Or it's like telling somebody who broke their leg, get over it, just walk. Or somebody who's sick, stop having that fever, be better instead. It just feels stupid when I read it. It's consider it pure joy when I'm facing sufferings. And then it goes on to say, it's because suffering produces endurance. So the best advice the Bible has for me is to be happy that I'm suffering, because then I'll be able to suffer better later. So that's when I read that stuff, it just frustrates me. But here's the thing. Here's what I've learned. I've learned that it is possible to experience joy even when you're suffering. But it isn't a direct jump from suffering to joy. There is something that has to go in the middle. There's something that has to take place first. And that word is gratitude. Gratitude, when you're suffering, is the path towards joy. It's the only way to get there. It makes joy possible. If you can practice gratitude, even when it hurts, you can practice joy. So we're going to talk about 4 ways we can cultivate gratitude even when it hurts. 4 ways we can stir up gratitude in our hearts even when we're not feeling so grateful. And the first way is remember the past, even the painful parts. So if you're taking notes, the first one is remember the past, even the painful parts. When we have gratitude, when our gratitude for the past is only partial, then our anticipation for the future can also be only partial. I'm going to say that again. When our gratitude for the past is only partial, then our anticipation for the future can only be partial. Recalling the past, even the bad stuff, it makes it possible for us to expect things from God in the future. Now, I am aware that there are people in this room who have deep traumas and deep wounds, and sometimes the only thing that keeps them going is keeping those memories from the past to not come up. I'm aware of that, but I also want to say that when we deny those memories, when we deny painful memories, when we deny the bad stuff, we also deny God's existence in those moments. We become atheists in that way. We deny that God was moving in those times. One of my favorite passages of Scripture, it's Psalm 42, verses 4 through 6. And this psalm is written by what the Bible calls one of the sons of Korah. That's just Bible speak for we don't know who wrote this. And so this psalm is about a guy who was once he was a great leader in the temple of Jerusalem. And he talks about how filled with joy and how he had this prominent role in leading worship in God's people at the time. And now for whatever reason, we don't know why, but for whatever reason, he has been cast out. And he's no longer able to engage in that worship with his people. And the psalm goes like this. It says, "My heart is breaking as I remember how it used to be." Is that right there? First sentence. Can anybody resonate with just those words? My heart is breaking as I remember how it used to be. I walked among the crowds of worshipers, leading a great procession to the house of God, singing for joy and giving thanks amid the sound of a great celebration. Why am I discouraged? Why is my heart so sad? I will put my hope in God. I will praise him again, my Savior and my God. For now I am deeply discouraged, but I will remember you. Even from the distant Mount Hermon, the source of the Jordan, the land of Mount Mizar, I will remember you, even though I am far away from what once made me joyful. I will put my hope in you, even though it breaks my heart to remember, because I can have anticipation that in the future, my God will be my Savior. Recalling the past, especially memories tainted by pain, is extremely difficult. And we often opt out of thinking such things. We often try and avoid talking about painful stuff that happened in the past. And with good reason, because if you dwell on what happened in the past, it's going to get you stuck and you're not going to be able to move forward. But it's also true that if you suppress what happened in the past, it's going to get you stuck and you're not going to be able to move forward. I remember for me, there was a memory that happened that for a couple years, I just pushed down as much as I possibly could. And it was my last birthday that I got to spend with my mom. It was my 20th birthday, and she invited me and some friends to go over to her apartment, and some stuff took place. And after that, after she died, I just couldn't even think about that moment without crying. I'd be sitting in the car, the moment would come to my mind, and I'd start crying. I'd be talking with people who'd want to talk about my mom, and that moment would come to mind, and I'd start tearing up, and I'd want to change the subject because I don't like crying in front of people. And it was after a while, my mom she took her own life. And so surrounding that incident was just this nagging feeling of, if she was able to do that, did she really love me? And if she can't even love me, if my own mother can't even love me, does God really love me? And so this spiral inside my heart would just kind of started digging until it was out of control, and I knew God was telling me, you need to talk to somebody. You just need to tell that story. And so I sat down with a friend, and I cried a lot, and I just said, when I was turned 20, my mom invited a bunch of my friends over to her apartment. She made my favorite meal. She made my favorite cake. She was not sober. I was embarrassed. I was angry, and I left. And in telling that story, I was able to realize that my mom, even drowning in the depths of her unhealth, even in the midst of her suffering and her sickness and her dying, even in all of that, found a way to push through and show love for me. That my mom did love me. that it was possible for my mom to carry this great suffering and this great pain and this great unhealth and love me at the exact same time. And now that memory serves as the last time I truly felt loved by my mom. What was once a memory of deep sorrow and deep pain that I couldn't even think about is now a memory that brings joy and warmth into my heart, because it lets me know that even though there were circumstances around her passing that were absolutely tragic, there was still a deep mother's love for her son. And that, how many of you guys know when you have an unconditional love of a parent, it makes it a lot easier to believe that God loves you. If you have a mom or a dad who just shows you consistent love, buying into a God who loves you, it's easier because you have something to gauge with it. Recalling the past, it makes it possible for us to expect things from God in the future. Henry Nouwen is maybe my favorite author. He helped a disabled community in Canada, and he just was a pastor towards people who were mentally handicapped and physically handicapped, and he got to witness a lot of suffering in his life. Suffering of people who were never able to walk or speak or get married or choose a career, who had to live in this small, impoverished place, and he spent the last portion of his life just serving these people. And he wrote books, and he talked about this. He said, if both joy and sorrow are to be worked out by God for our good, then we have reason to be grateful for every moment of life, good and bad. Such a perspective allows us to see God in all of life, not just the time set aside for spiritual discipline and worship, not just when life seems good. If God can be found in hard times, then all of life, no matter how apparently insignificant or hard, can reveal the grace of God. If God can be found in hard times, then all of life, no matter how insignificant or hard, can reveal the grace of God. So if we want to experience gratitude, one of the first things we have to do is be willing to stop and look back at the things that God carried you through, because guess what? You're still here. You're still alive. Whatever you faced did not kill you. It did not take you out. God has brought you through it. And so we look back at the past and we see how God carried us through, and it gives us something to draw on for now. It gives us something to count on here and now and in the future. I have this conviction when I'm giving a message to not have only personal applications. I want to try and say something that goes towards a person that they can just take inside their heart, but I also want to say something meaningful to a church collectively and corporately. And so some of these things I'm going to talk about what we can do individually and then what we can do as a church. And when I say what we can do as a church, I'm not saying something that Pastor Dave has commissioned or the leadership team has been praying about and we're going to be doing this new thing. What we can do as a church means what you can do with your people, with your community, with your tribe, with the people that you are doing life with. Because here's the truth. If we can take a personal application and apply it just fine on our own, we are not practicing Christianity, we're practicing self-help. If we take a personal application and we use the resources of our community, then we're practicing Christianity. Then we're practicing church. It requires us doing these things together. So how does this recalling the past, how does this fit in as a church? I would say that right now, if there was ever a time that the church needed to recall its heritage, it's right now. And here's why I say that. In 2007, Pew Research Center did a poll where they've tried to figure out how many people in America consider themselves to be Christians. And in 2007, they said about 78% of Americans consider themselves to be Christians. Fast forward 7 years. They do the same poll again. It's 2014. Now, only 70% of Americans consider themselves to be Christian. That's an 8% drop in 7 years. And we have to ask ourselves, why is this? Why did this happen? It's not like 8% of our population died off. Something is taking place where people are saying they don't want to engage with Christianity anymore. And I'm going to add to that, people aren't leaving church because they have a problem with Jesus. People aren't leaving Christianity because they decided they don't like Jesus anymore. Now, both times I've had an opportunity to speak up here, I've used it as an opportunity to talk about the ways in which I have seen church hurt people personally and the ways in which I want to see church do better. I'm not going to beat that horse anymore, but I am going to say, just when they surveyed people and they asked the three main reasons, why are you not involved with church? These are the three things they said. It says that in church, they encountered fear and suspicion of science, fear and suspicion of people who were different from them, and they saw what they perceived to be a greater concern with political power and financial influence than with generosity. This is what they said. Those are the three main reasons as to why they said, I don't really want to be a part of that. Now, that's a broad generalization. That is not speaking to every community of worshipers. That is just these people's experiences and what the data showed when they interviewed them. Now, when you think about that and you compare that to how we started, which was just like, we weren't a group of Jews 2,000 years ago, so we didn't do this, but how our tradition and how our movement started. Just a small group of people in an upper room who had spent 3 years with Jesus and who saw what living with Jesus and living like Jesus could do to their community, and who just said, I want that. I want that Jesus life. I need that Jesus life. And they were devoted to prayer and fasting until they were given the power to live that Jesus life. And that is when it spread. It had nothing to do with financial prosperity. It had nothing to do with political power. They had none of that. And it spread like wildfire. That's how the Jesus movement started. And that is what's going to get people to come to see Jesus and come to church. That is what draws people to Christ. So if we want to see, we hear talk of revival, if we want to see revival, if we want to see people saved, if we want to see people's lives changed, if our hearts break for what happens to people when they die, we have to start living like Jesus. We have to take seriously living like Jesus. And that happens when we stop and we recall the past. This is why it's so important to read our Bibles. We have to look at what Jesus and the disciples were doing in that time. We don't have to guess. We don't have to try and figure it out on our own. It's been written for us, and it's been passed down for 1,500 years. So we have the resources that we need. So if we want to see people come to Jesus, we have to recall the past. Okay, number 2, live in a posture of generosity and surrender. A couple years ago, Jordan and I were having a conversation, and I'm going to make some observations, and he and I have a disagreement over who made these observations first, him or me. He gave it the fancy terms I'm going to use, the 3 Ps. We'll get to that in a second, but I'm giving him partial credit. You don't get all the credit, you get some of the credit. So when you look at Luke chapter 4 and Matthew chapter 4, you see that Satan is tempting Jesus in the wilderness. And he tempts Jesus with 3 things, and it's what Jordan has called the 3 Ps. And I'm going to talk about each of those 3 things. The first thing that Jesus tempts Jesus with is taking a rock and turning into bread. So Jesus has been fasting in the desert for 40 days. He's probably a little hungry. Satan comes up to him and says, hey, if you're so hungry and if you're truly the Son of God, take this rock and turn it into bread. And Jesus says, no, man does not live on bread alone, but the very word that comes from the mouth of God. And so the first P that you can look at when Satan is tempting Jesus here is prosperity. He tempts Jesus by taking something that can make himself prosper, right? So we see that. The first thing Satan is tempting Jesus with is some form of prosperity. The second thing, he takes Jesus on top of a mountain and he shows Jesus all the kingdoms of the world. And he says to Jesus, if you bow down and worship me, I will give you all of these kingdoms and all of this power and all of this military power and all this wealth. I will give it to you if you worship me. Second P is power. Now, Jesus was an oppressed Jew and occupied Israel. He was a part of a people whose necks were being held under the boot of the oppression of Rome. He probably could have really used that military power and that wealth. Third thing, he takes Jesus on top of a mountain and he says, if you're truly the Son of God, jump off this mountain and surely God will send his angels to catch you. Surely God's angels will protect you. Do something stupid and reckless and dangerous just to show that God will protect you. The third thing Satan is tempting Jesus with is protection. Prosperity, power, and protection are 3 things that Jesus said no to. And they're 3 things that our culture absolutely worships. Now, prosperity, power, and protection are not bad things. But just like any not bad thing, when you turn a thing into an ultimate thing, it becomes an idol. And idols break our hearts, and idols are bad things. Prosperity, power, and protection are also the 3 things that I feel like stand most in the way of people when it comes to practicing generosity. Our society and Jesus' society views the world through a lens of scarcity. There's never enough. There's never enough money. There's never enough resources. There's never enough power. There's never enough stuff for me. And because there's not enough, there isn't enough to help people who are in need. Because if we use what we have to help people who are in need, then I will be one of the needy. That's the mindset, is that we just don't have enough to take care of other people. We only have enough to take care of ourselves. Why was Jesus able to say no to these things? If he was a starving, broke, occupied, oppressed Jew in the middle of the desert who was being offered everything that he could use for his liberation and his people's liberation, what gave him the ability to say no to these things is because Jesus knew he was working with a different set of resources than the average person. Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus was first and foremost a citizen of heaven. His resources were not of this world. He was working from the Father's abundance, because the kingdom reality is that God will always give us exactly what we need and then some. There is abundance for followers and for people who claim to be citizens of the kingdom of heaven. Because of this, Jesus could say no to prosperity, power, and protection. Jesus could say, I'm not going to take those things. I'm going to give those things because I have an endless resource in the kingdom of heaven. And if we want to practice gratitude, we have to practice surrender and generosity. And that includes surrendering sometimes our power, our prosperity, and our protection and giving it to the people who need it. And really, you're not losing a thing, because what resources do we have access to? Kingdom of Heaven's resources. The things that Jesus had access to are the things that we have access to. And if you are a citizen of the Kingdom of Heaven, you do not view the world through a lens of scarcity. You view the world through a lens of abundance. You have abundant resources at your disposal, which means you have an abundance of power, prosperity, and protection to offer people. So if we want to be generous people, if we want to be gracious people and people who are filled with gratitude, we have to say, God, I am surrendering these things that my society worships. I'm laying them down to you, and I'm going to use what I've been given to benefit other people. And I promise you, here's the ironic thing. People who hoard their resources, people who take what they have and keep it for themselves, are very rarely a generous people. They're very rarely people who are generous, and they're also very rarely a grateful people. They always want and need more. But when you look at people who are always giving, who always have more to give, those are the most grateful people that you're going to ever meet. That's the ironic thing. It's a trap that we get ourselves into. We think if we have more, we'll be grateful. But really, when we give more, that's when we experience gratitude. Third thing, if you want to cultivate gratitude, even when it hurts, don't deny your pain. Don't deny your pain. Judaism, all the way through the early church, had this rich tradition and history of practicing lament. Did you know that just about 50% of the Psalms in the Bible are a real bummer? It's not like something you read. Yeah, you don't just open up randomly to the book of Psalms hoping it's going to cheer you up, because there's a 50% chance it's going to do the exact opposite. Half the book of Psalms. We have a book in the Bible called Lamentations. Moses, David, the prophets, Jesus, they all wept. Our sacred text, our scriptures, makes room for people who are in suffering to acknowledge their suffering. It makes room for people who are in pain to own their pain. And this is why, in so many ways, the Bible is so ahead of its time, because it understands something that even us now, in the most enlightened and technologically advanced society in the world, don't fully understand. It acknowledges that if you are experiencing sorrow and grief and pain, it must be processed. It must be acknowledged, because if it isn't acknowledged, it will destroy you. And the Bible knows this, and it's filled from beginning to end of people stopping and taking time to acknowledge the pain that they're experiencing. And here's the amazing thing. It is possible to live in the tension of gratitude and pain. It's possible to live in the tension of saying, yes, I am hurt, but I'm also grateful. Every week, hundreds of people come in and out of these doors over here. Hundreds of people. And they come in and we shake hands and we ask how you're doing and we say, oh, I'm doing good. And I know that in some of those weeks, there are people who come in here who contemplated suicide earlier that week. And there are people who come in here who just found out their marriage is falling apart. And there are people who come in here who lost their job. And people who come in here who relapsed. And people who come in here whose depression has returned and who are full of anxious nerves. And those people come and they shake hands, and when they're asked how you're doing, they say, I'm doing fine. I'm doing good. And everybody in this church does it. Every single person. We come up from the person who's preaching at the pulpit to whoever's sitting in the chairs. We just put on a face and we lie and we say, I'm doing good. This is not something that is in the church because the Bible mandates it be in the church. This is a product of our culture that we live in. We don't know how to deal with people not being okay. We don't know how to deal with things when they're not fine, so we just shove it aside and we don't acknowledge it. And I don't know that there's a way to change it. I don't know that it would be better if you're not doing well, if every person who's not doing good would just tell everybody that they're not doing good. I think it would be total chaos, like I really do. But here's what I think. I think that if you can find 2 or 3 or 4 people that just make your people and say, hey, I am not doing good, and here's exactly why I'm not doing good. When you can stand before some people and show them everything you dislike about yourself, show them all of your shame and all of your sin and all of your despair, and you can put that on the forefront for people, I promise you that after you do that, and those people still say, I choose you and I love you and you belong with me, when you can do that, I promise you, you are going to be filled with gratitude. Your pain isn't going to go away, but you are going to be filled with gratitude. So we have to acknowledge our pain if we want to experience true gratitude. Amen. When the Orlando Pulse nightclub shootings happened, there's a pastor whose work I follow pretty closely. His name's Brian Zond. He opened up his church for people to come in and just lament over what was going on. Just pray for the families and the people who lost their lives, and for people who were afraid after it happened, and for the tensions that would surely rise in the wake of that shooting. And he just prayed for it. And one of the things he said while his church was gathered and they were praying for it, he says, we can practice lament and gratitude at the same time because our pain is real and our God is also just as real. Because God exists just as much as our pain exists, it is possible to acknowledge pain and gratitude at the same time. We should never deny the very real trials and horrors of this life, but we shouldn't place them at the center either. Our lives need to be centered on gratitude. Last thing. Look upon the cross and see that the pattern of our God is death and resurrection. If you want to cultivate gratitude, look upon the cross and see that the pattern of our God is death and resurrection. You might be here and you might be the one who relapsed, or you might be the one fearing for your marriage, or you might be the one depressed or anxious or barely able to hang on to hope in this moment. When I'm not doing well and I look at the cross, it reminds me of how my story ends. It reminds me of the promise that's mine, and that is resurrection. When you think about that day when Jesus died, and you think about him being tortured and murdered on the cross, like and his disciples who were there, nobody was like, praise God, wow, what a work of God. Nobody was looking at that saying, man, my sins have been cleansed, I've experienced redemption. Nobody was dancing, nobody was singing, nobody was joyful. In that moment, for these people who were following Jesus, they called into question their very reality of the last 3 years that they lived. When they looked at the cross, they saw total despair and pain and agony, and they saw no way out of it. And the cross was an instrument of death in those days. The cross, when you saw someone on a cross, they were condemned. They weren't a hero, they weren't a god, they weren't a prophet, they weren't a miracle maker, they were a criminal. We wear crosses on necklaces and we have tattoos of crosses, and we kind of like taken away the weight of the cross with how much we just have crosses everywhere. But in that day, it would be like the equivalent of wearing an electric chair necklace or having an electric chair tattoo. You don't look at people who die on death row and say, wow, there's the glory of God. Jesus died on a cross, and his disciples had lost everything in that moment. But 3 days later, what do we know happened? Amen. Resurrection happened. 3 days later, Jesus stood before the world that was trapped in the curse of sin, death, and destruction, and he saw that the most powerful weapon that the enemy had, death itself, and he took it from the enemy. And he said, my followers will no longer, you will have no power over my followers. The one thing you have over them, death, is gone. Jesus came and he brought resurrection life, and now that's how our stories end. That's good news. You look at the cross, If you're feeling painful and you don't see any hope, just know that if you can't see the perspective in your life right now, if you can't see how things are going to turn out okay, you can look at Jesus and you can look at his victory, because his victory is promised to be our victory. That is the promise of resurrection. Death, your story, metaphorical or literal, whatever kind of death you're facing in your life right now, will not have the final say in your life. We can have gratitude when we look at the cross, because the cross promises us that this story has a really good ending. I'm going to have Matt Weimer come up, and he's going to sing a song. Earlier this year, I was listening to the song, and it just helped me put into perspective kind of why I go through hard times. You're frustrated and you're angry and you want things to just go well, and you're asking God the understandable question of, like, why are things so bad? And this song just helped put that thing in perspective. It's by a band called the Oh Hellos. If you want to look it up, it's called I Have Made Mistakes. I'm just going to have Matt sing it, and then we're going to conclude.
I have made mistakes. I have made mistakes, and I continue to make them. The promises I made, the promises I made, I continue to break them. And all the doubts I faced, all the doubts I faced, I continue to face them. But nothing is a waste. Nothing is a waste if you learn from it. And the sun does not cause us, the sun does not cause us to grow. It is the rain that will strengthen, the rain that will strengthen your soul. It will make you whole. We have lived in fear. We have lived in fear, and our fear has betrayed us. And we will overcome. We will overcome the apathy that has made us. 'Cause we are not alone. We are not alone in the dark with our demons. We have made mistakes. We have made mistakes, but we've learned from them. And the sun, it does not cause us. The sun, it does not cause us to grow. It is the rain that will strengthen, the rain that will strengthen your soul. And the sun, it does not cause us, the sun, it does not cause us to grow. It is the rain that will strengthen, the rain that will strengthen your soul. It will make you whole.
Am I on? Yeah? Okay. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, when you face trials and tribulations of many kinds, because the testing of your faith produces endurance. If you want that to be true of you, if you want to be able to look at the pain you're experiencing right now and you want to be able to say, I can still claim joy for my life in this moment, We have to remember the stuff that God has brought us through. Even the painful stuff. We have to be brave and we have to look back. We have to see what God has delivered us from. We have to surrender and give more. Not of our own resources, but out of the resources of the kingdom of heaven. We have to acknowledge our pain in the presence of God and in the presence of people who know us and love us and will remind us that even in our most shameful moments, we're worthy of love and belonging. And you have to look upon the cross and you have to see the face of love. And you have to acknowledge that the cross gives us a perspective that our sufferings do not give us right now. There is resurrection just around the corner. Whatever you are facing, there is life that will come from this. I'm going to have everybody bow their heads and close their eyes. And if you're someone who needs just a reminder of that hope, you're going through a hard time and you're thinking, this Thanksgiving is going to be a bummer. I got to put on a face for my family, but inside I'm just wasting away. I'm going to ask you in a second, not now, but in a second, I'm going to ask you to just make eye contact with me. And I'm going to pray for you, and I'm going to pray for me, because I'm struggling too. And I'm not going to have you come up. I'm not going to have people put their hands on you. We're just going to pray together. And if you aren't looking up at me, I want you to just enter into prayer for the people who will. So if you are struggling right now and you need some of that thanksgiving and gratitude and you want to take those steps, would you just look up at me and make eye contact? I see you, you and you. See you. See you. See you. 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 See you. See you. God, all these things, they're just concepts until we put them into action. And I think if people are anything like me, it's that first step of action that feels impossible. That's the heaviest step to take. But God, I ask for courageous people in this room. I ask that you would just give them some of your courage. And if people in here don't have any strength of their own, I ask that you would give them your strength. Give us the strength to look back at some of the more painful times and recognize with gratitude what you've brought us through. Give us the courage to give even when we're afraid that we'll be without if we give. Give us the courage to own our pain and our shame in front of you and in front of people who love us. And remind us all the time that the cross is empty and the tomb is empty. There's resurrection for us. Lord, I thank you for what you're speaking to people. Thank you for your hope, and your love, and your kindness, and your light, and that those are our inheritance. I love you. In your name, amen. If you need prayer of any kind, the prayer team is going to be up here for a little while just to pray with people. Other than that, have an amazing Thanksgiving, and I'll see you guys later.